everybody. Thank you all for coming. My name is Miss Jennifer. As Eugene was saying, please fill out the poll if you have not already. I would really like to see who we have in the audience. I can see right now the majority of the students that we have are mostly in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade. We do have a couple of elementary school kids, but that's great to know. I also know we have a couple of English speakers in the audience, and so today I will be using mostly English. If I do speak a little bit of Chinese, don't worry, I'll also translate that as well. Thank you so much for coming today, and our topic of today is good grades versus good habits. So we're going to be going a little bit into the research. What happens when you have good grades and what happens do you have good habits? And of course, we'll also be talking a little bit about the good habits that you can help your kids develop starting honestly as young as in elementary school. But of course, very importantly, we want to focus on these habits in middle school as well. Are you guys ready? Okay, let's get started. Okay, so I'm sure we have all heard ever since the time that we were young that the purpose of good grades is that if we get straight A's, we will one day be able to get into a great college, perhaps MIT, perhaps Harvard, maybe it's Stanford. After we get that wonderful glittering degree, we are going to go and get an amazing job somewhere, perhaps at Facebook, maybe at Apple. I guess these are all engineering types since I am in the Bay Area. But of course, there's also other big companies as well that I'm sure many parents tell their kids that one day you must aspire to get into. And because you get this wonderful job, you are going to make lots and lots of money. You will be successful and you will be happy, all because of your good grades. Sound familiar? So I'm sure that this is a message that we have heard many, many times. Perhaps it is one that you have told your own kids. Perhaps it is one that you have heard yourself. Well, let's take a closer look at this and what can we see? Is this true or is this not true? I mean, how much of this is true? Well, let's take a look. All right, so grades are definitely very, very important. In fact, if you take a look at this chart right over here, you will see that it is the #1 factor when applying for college. It is the #1 factor of what is the most important thing that colleges look at. So as you can see in the top, your grades in college prep courses, it counts for 71% of colleges think that that is the most important factor. Grades in all courses, 81% of colleges consider that to be the most important factor. So that is what good grades are for. However, if you take a closer look into the research, you will see that actually all research will tell you that your grades in school have no connection to your future success, including income. Your SAT score, I'm going to kind of lump SAT scores and standardized tests in here. But your SAT score also has no connection to your future success. I mean, you can look at all the research, they will all tell you the same thing. And so what we have discovered through research is that grades are actually only a measure of how well you can reach the same conclusion as your teacher. That's basically it. So your good grades, I'll say that again, your good grades are only a reflection of how well you know what your teacher wants. It doesn't have anything to do with necessarily how good you are doing in school, your aptitude, your IQ, or anything like that. All right. So in addition, grades are also really important for following in directions, coloring inside the lines, meaning following, what's supposed to be going on, right? And delivering what is expected, but that's basically about it. So let's go into this just a little bit more deeply. All right. The research has actually been done very extensively on good grades. And actually, according to a more recent NYU study, I believe more recent, I guess, in the last 10 years, I think it was in 2010, grades are actually inversely correlated to innovation. What does that mean? The better grades you have, the less creative and ability to innovate, the less likely you are able to innovate and be creative. And they say that this is because innovation requires intrinsic motivation. Remember a couple sessions ago, we were talking about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation means you are motivated by internal factors, such as, your own interest or your own passion. So innovation only happens really when you're intrinsically motivated. Grades, on the other hand, they are a form of external motivation or extrinsic motivation. All right. And so that's why they said the study says that grades are inversely correlated with innovation. They actually did a study on Chinese students. So for the most of the people who are here today, I know are of Chinese descent. I'm sure many of you guys know about Gaokao. Okay, Gaokao is the entrance exam for colleges. I know that this is used in most East Asian countries, and they have found that the students who scored the highest on these tests didn't end up being more successful. I mean, everyone talks about like, oh, that's great, we need to score well in this Gaokao. But then they go and follow these people years down the road, see where they're at. They are not making the most money. They are definitely not the most successful. So why do we focus so much on this test? I mean, if grades were so important and scores were so important, then it should only make sense that the people who are making the best grades, who are scoring the most highly on tests, are also the most successful people in the world, right? In addition, grades do not measure your leadership ability, your creative thinking, your emotional intelligence, your ability to work with others. It doesn't allow you to predict the needs of society or consumers. And the reality is I'm sure, Elon Musk and all these big CEOs say, I didn't necessarily go to the best college, I didn't necessarily get the best grades, but I employ all of those people, right? So I'm not saying today that you shouldn't have your kids get good grades. I'm just saying, let's really understand what the purpose of good grades are for. And we'll get into this a little bit more deeply. All right. I do have somebody who sent me a message. Success. How can we define success? All right. I think that's actually really, really important. What is success defined by? Many people might define it by money. Maybe some people may define it by happiness. Maybe some people may define it by the position that you have achieved in life. I think everyone has their own definitions. For today's purposes, I would like to say maybe it's like a mixture of the three, like maybe how happy you are and where you are in life, and maybe achieving a lifestyle where you don't need to worry too much. I do think that financial means is part of the equation. I mean, I don't think that there's a huge difference. I mean, I guess everyone's goals are different. My point is, I think when most people think about success, they think about, have I achieved enough to a place that I can get in life where I am more or less comfortable? All right. So what about habits? All right. Habits are different from grades, right? A lot of times if we develop healthy habits, it can also prepare you to get good grades as well. And actually, habits can help you develop parts of your personality. They also develop the skills that you need to get good grades, and also the skills for you to just succeed in life. All right. One thing that parents often forget when they're talking about only wanting good grades is that grades only last until college and when you're in school. But once you're out of school, then what happens? If a person only knows how to study, what do they do when they're not studying anymore? And that kind of goes back to my last slide when we have a Chinese saying that says 高分低能, high scores but low ability. All right. That's really important to pay attention to. And when I have a lot of my high schoolers that I'm counseling these days, I have some students who are scoring very, very well in school. But when it comes to any of these qualities that we're talking about down here, leadership, creative thinking, problem solving, they can't do it. You ask them a simple question like, what are your classes for next semester? And they look at their mom and dad like, I don't know, ask them. But they're getting perfect grades, but they don't even know what classes they're taking next year. So it's very important to differentiate these two. I think the best of both worlds is to obviously find a way to get those good grades, but also build those healthy habits in the process. And also maybe take a smaller emphasis on the grades and make sure that they have the habits that they can use to succeed no matter which direction or which school that they end up going to, right? So what does the research say then in terms of habits? All right. Why is this so important? Well, actually, when it comes to success, whether you want to define success by making enough money or, achieving a position in life that you're happy with, it actually shows that your personality traits are a better measure of success than grades. And so what do these personality traits mean? Meaning like perseverance, your diligence, your self-discipline. And the good news for parents, though, is that personality traits can often be trained. We know this already. Somebody who is introverted can learn how to interact in a social environment, right? Just because you are born as an introvert doesn't mean that you will never be able to talk to people. So as we know, a lot of these things that come with personality, you can learn them. And that's what I really want to talk about today. Another personality trait, or another, I guess, skill or habit, is your ability to communicate, your communication skill. So having a high EQ, or having the ability to talk to others, knowing how to network and build connections with others. This is something that's not talked about very much. And it's a huge, huge factor in success. So people who end up doing the best, whether it's climbing the corporate ladder, or being innovative and building companies, entrepreneurship, these are all people who are able to connect with other people, right? Know how to talk to others, know how to make connections. And finally, in my opinion, one of the most important pieces is ability to problem solve. One issue with grades that we had mentioned earlier, right? One of the issue with grades is that grades are only a measure of how well you follow instructions. And so if you're great at following instructions, it's kind of like the opposite of not following instructions, meaning thinking on your own, having your own opinions, having your own thoughts. And as we know, in Asian culture, in most Asian cultures, there's a huge value on obedience. We need to respect our elders. We need to listen to what our parents say. That is the most important thing. And at the same time, a lot of these parents are requesting that their kids be leaders, that they're going to be very successful because they're becoming leaders. Well, you realize you're literally contradicting yourself. Leaders don't follow by nature, right? And yet if a student or a child is exhibiting leadership skills, parents oftentimes only request that they stay obedient. You're squashing their leadership skill. You're squashing their potential ability for success. So how can we find that balance between the two? That, I think, is the big question. So today I'm going to be going over several habits that I've noticed that a lot of students, especially Asian parents, are lacking, or maybe can spend more time developing. And maybe what can you do at home to really further your children's desire to become successful, or to teach them to have these habits, so that when they're getting into high school, they can continue to have those good grades and achieve what you feel like is the best of their potential. All right, so let's go straight into the first one. Some of this is review from some of my past webinars, but I do think that I'm going to give a different take on this. And so if it is repetitive, bear with me. I'm sure there's other things that you haven't heard before. So number one, first habit, learn how to set goals and create a pathway to reach them. We talked a lot about this with time management. I think that was our first session quite a while ago. A lot of times we have a common scenario in which a kid's grades have dropped, possibly because of the pandemic, possibly because of any other reason. And it seems like they're just not caring or not doing anything about it. And because of this, parents get really, really upset. We're going to have a lot of examples today of parents getting upset. And I think they're going to be quite relatable to a lot of parents. All right. So what do? You tell your kids like, hey, you need to do better in school. And they know that, but nothing is happening. But why? Have you taught your child how to set goals? Have you taught your child how to create a pathway in which to reach those goals? Very recently, I was talking with my husband who works for a corporate company, and he was sharing with me one of the things that his company asks from him, his manager, which is you are in charge of creating your own goals. You create your own timeline, and then you need to tell me at what point these goals are going to be met. And I was like, wow, that's great. Why don't we do that for our kids? I mean, we ask adults to do this. It's not that complicated. I mean, maybe as an adult, you can do it at a deeper level, but why can't we do this for our kids and have the same type of expectation? Why can't we teach children, if they're currently getting a C in math, say, okay, what is the goal that you would like to make to improve upon this, right? And so that's really, really important. Every single time I have a student who sets their own goals, almost always they meet them. And what I mean by setting their own goals is that they set a goal that they want, not what the mom wants or what the parents want. So for example, let's just say our student has a C in math right now. Well, mom and dad are saying, okay, I really want you to get that A. Well, the student is like, wow, that A is kind of far away from me right now. I really think that my goal should just be a C+. You'd be surprised if you let your child get that goal, create that goal. They will be more likely to reach it because it is a goal that they feel like is feasible, right? Did you also discuss how to reach that goal? So there are some students, they're very, very, idealistic. They have a C in math. They're saying, I can get that A. And we're like, okay, that's great. And sometimes parents stop right there. As long as my kids say they can do it, we're going to stop. Have you asked that follow-up question? Well, how do you think you're going to get that? And this is really interesting because when I ask middle schoolers, how are you going to do that? What are you going to do differently? They look at me and they're like, huh? Because they actually haven't thought about it. In their mind, they're just like, oh, well, I really want that. But they haven't really thought deeply, what are the steps I'm going to take that's going to be different from right now that will help me to achieve that goal? I mean, really, really break it down. So we can say, all right, you want an A in math. What do you think you can do that is going to change the outcome? Do you think you're going to study an extra 30 minutes every day? Do you think you're going to practice some extra worksheets? Do you think you're going to go and talk to your teacher each time you have a question? Are you going to attend office hours? Are you going to ask mom for a tutor? Like, there has to be an extra step involved. That's not just, I want the goal. And I think a lot of times for elementary schoolers and middle schoolers, they literally just don't have any ideas. So it is up to us as the adult, the parent, to give them those ideas and then help them to reach that goal. In education, we call this like scaffolding, and this is a term that we use in education and teacher training. Scaffolding normally is like on a building when it's getting built. It's all those, like, I don't know if you guys remember like watching Rush Hour and like Jackie Chan's like fighting on the buildings and hanging off the edge because they're like building it. That's the scaffolding. So the point is, scaffolding is supposed to support a child's learning. And so when your child does fail to meet a goal, which is going to happen all the time because they are kids, they are not perfect, they are still learning, how are we going to react? Are we going to tell them, oh my God, you're in trouble, you didn't reach your goal? Or are we going to say like, okay, what went wrong? What do you think you did that didn't work? And how are we going to adjust to make sure that that doesn't happen again? See, when you tell them and you get mad at them for not hitting the goal, is that going to convince them to want to set new goals? Because they might just think, well, if I try and I fail, I'm going to get in trouble anyway. So why should I? Right? As opposed to, okay, fine, you didn't reach your goal. Let's see what you did. What did you do wrong? I mean, I did this very recently with some middle schoolers and high schoolers. Actually, we set a grade goal. They're off by about 2%. Maybe their goal was 90%. He was at an 88. And I asked, okay, well, what did you do differently? What did you not do correctly? It's like, oh, well, I forgot to turn in a homework assignment, which is very common right now for middle schoolers, right? Especially during the pandemic. And so I'm like, okay, well, what can we do then to help you remember to turn in all of your homework assignments? Like, oh, I don't really know. It's like, well, did you hear about alerts, calendar alerts? Do you think you could try that? They're like, what? What's that? Well, if you go on your calendar, you can actually set an alarm for each event or homework assignment to remind you that it's due. Oh my God, mind blown. I mean, that's just one tiny thing that they have to do, right? And then we can help them set up, don't know how to do it. Let me take out your computer. Let me show you how to do this. And then I'll even add in an extra piece. I do this all the time. If I have to go pick up my son and I'm really busy, I'm going to set an alarm on my phone to remind me so I don't forget. It's normal to forget. Let's find ways to get past it, right? This is so important because it is training those skills in executive functioning that we've talked about literally every single class so far. For those of you who are here, I hope you are starting to really remember this term of executive functioning. Executive functioning is controlled by this front portion of your brain. It is what makes us uniquely human. And it is the part that controls decision-making skills, planning, time management, perseverance, all of those like very, very complicated and complex ways of thinking that most animals are not capable of doing. That part of thinking is trained. It is trained. So we need to start training our kids at a younger age on how to do that. All right. So let's move on to the second one. Predicting the amount of time to do something and setting priorities. Well, another common scenario that we have is that a child waits until the last minute to finish their work. They either end up forgetting about it or they just don't complete the work. And because of that, your grades drop and the parents are upset. Like I said, we're gonna have a lot of stories about parents being upset. So the parents are just like, why didn't you do this? Why are your grades not good? Did we actually talk about why their grades are not good? Did we figure out the reason? And so when I asked the student, well, why did you not, why did your grade drop? I always ask. And they said, well, I didn't do the work, or I thought I was going to be able to take 5 hours, but it ended up taking 10 hours. So what are you going to do about that? Are we going to say like, well, you just need to plan and have more time? That's not going to help a child. They still don't know what to do. They know they need to have more time. That's not going to help them. So again, sitting next to them and really breaking down their pieces of their work into manageable chunks is so, so important. I mean, when I'm working with middle schoolers, that's honestly one of the biggest things that I do is all I do is I say, okay, how much work do you have done? Okay, you have 5 assignments. How were you planning on tackling this? Oh, I was just going to sit down and work on it the whole afternoon. I was like, no, don't do that. Because for sure, you're not going to get it all done. What you need to do is arrange times to do it, the priorities, which one is the most important, which one is the least important, and then make sure you give yourself enough break in between so you're not worn out. And so if for a student who gets easily distracted, who's playing video games, who's chatting, you can say, you're allowed to chat, you're allowed to play video games, but only during your break time. So focus time is focus time, break time is break time. So let's do one assignment, knock that out, give yourself 30 minutes, go play games or chat with someone or do whatever you want, go watch a TV show for 30 minutes, then come back and let's knock out this next activity. The biggest complaint that I really get from students is when I look at how much work I need to get done, it's just so hard to get started. So how can we turn that big pile of work into just a small pile of work? You know, that's the trick. And so we also need to give our students enough incentives to do a good job, right? To have a priority. Why would a student want to go do homework when they could easily just be watching YouTube? I mean, come on, who's going to choose do homework? Nobody. So what kind of incentive can we provide to allow them to think like, hey, you know, if I get this done, then maybe I can play a game. If you take away all of the rewards, it's not attractive anymore to a student. And so whenever kids come to me as a counselor and they say like, they're very skeptical and they say, are you going to tell my parents I can't have any more game time? Are you going to tell my parents I can't chat with my friends anymore? And I always say, no, I'm going to tell them that you are allowed to, but we need to have the order of priorities. And so when I even ask them for their homework, I'm like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which one's the most important? Which one's the second most important? Are there ones we can move off to the side? Do we have to get everything done today? If everything is done today, we have so much work that's done today, how can we rearrange things so that we can do a little bit, you know, on this other day? Next time that we know that we have a big assignment, can we split this up into a lot of small pieces? You know, these are real conversations we should be having with our kids, because once you give them the fangfa, the way to do it, they will actually do it. But currently, most middle schoolers, because their homework level is not quite as of a heavy load as high schoolers, they don't really need to use their brain to plan so much. And so by teaching them these skills in elementary school and middle school, it's really giving them the foundation to do the same thing when they get into high school and they actually do have a very heavy course load. All right, let's move on. Habit number 3, learn how to learn. Now, this is really important, especially middle school, I think. And we often reward our students for having good grades or having good grades, but we don't reward them enough about the process. In fact, with my students, especially the students who I know are really, really smart, getting a good grade on an assignment or a test to me is usually not good enough. I want to know that you put in your best effort. I want to know how much planning and time management that you put into this in order to get that good score. If I know that a child just last minute did some work and got an A on it, that's not impressive to me. But a student, for example, on the other hand, who really put in the time and effort to do the planning, you know, really set aside their time, set their priorities straight, but still wasn't able to achieve the highest mark, I still give them good job, good job. Next time we're going to try this again. We're going to do a better job next time. Let's see what we can adjust. That process is so, so important. So really what we should be doing is we should be teaching our kids how to learn and not just have the final result. I mean, this is the exact opposite of rewarding somebody for their grades. So another scenario, grades have gone down. The parents are upset with the child because they didn't get an A. And so the parents lectures the student about the importance of good grades. Well, okay, I'm not saying there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, but we have to remember there's a second side of this conversation. A lot of times when you ask a student, why are your parents not happy with you? They'll just be like, because I didn't get an A. They don't say because I didn't work hard enough. They say because I didn't get an A. And I think that's really important, asking your kids, what do you think I'm not happy about? I mean, is that a question you ask? Because I would love to hear what your kids think you're not happy about, right? Is it because of the score, or is it because of something that went wrong in the process? And I think that we have to explicitly tell our kids in middle school, or even in elementary school, we can tell them it's not about the grade. It's about the fact that I saw you do everything at the last minute when I could have helped you. Keyword, I could have helped you plan your time so you did a little bit every day, but you didn't want my help. I saw you, stay up until 2 a.m. trying to finish this. And it really hurt me to see you have to struggle this hard. If you had let me help you just plan your time a little bit better, I really think you could have been able to manage the workload. You see what I'm saying? So its key point is focusing on what went wrong in the process. All right, that process. All right. In this graph we have here, it's really interesting because when people ask like, well, how do kids learn? I think this is reflective of how important it is and how we retain information. I always tell kids this question: how much do you think we remember when you read something? Well, the studies have already shown it's only 10%. So in order to make someone remember what they were supposed to learn, we need to add different aspects to it. So whether they read it, they heard it, whether they talked about it, the best way to help a student learn to do something is to teach it to somebody else. For example, if you are unsure whether your child knows the process, just ask them, how do you plan on tackling this project? 95% of what we teach to others is when we teach something to others, we will be more likely to remember it. And so if you have a sibling, right, you can have the older sibling teach the younger sibling, here's what you need to do in order to get this. That doesn't matter if the younger sibling's listening or not. The fact that the person is verbalizing and teaching it to somebody else, that's going to help them, solidify that process in their mind. All right. In addition, we need to reward parts of the process that the child did well. I'll give you an example. It just literally just happened last week, actually like 2 days ago, actually just yesterday. A student came in, he had literally failed all of his classes last semester. It's not a joke. He had 2 D's, a C, and an F. Okay, this is a community college student, all right? Terrible grades, and we were very, very upset. Mom was very, very upset. And we said, okay, what do we need to do better? So we arranged our time schedule, we worked on time management. This semester, as of right now, he has 2 B's, an A, and a D. Okay, much more, we definitely see the improvement. All right, now what did we say? Did we say, oh my God, I can't believe you have a D, which is actually what the mom said. That's all the mom said. Why do you have a D? All right, is that going to be motivating for a child? Probably not, because I see him come in every day. He really, really works hard to follow his schedule. So the first part we need to say is, hey, you know what? I see you. I see what you have done differently. I applaud you for the part that you have changed. Now, what are we going to do about this D? All right. You see how this is taking away the blame and saying like, okay, now we're problem solving together. Right? He knows I have already complimented him on one piece of the process. The whole process is not perfect yet, but at least there's a part that's good. We have to remember to acknowledge that portion. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about motivation and acknowledgement. Acknowledgement. A big part of Asian Americans' complaints of their parents is when they get an A, nobody says anything. Nobody says good job. Nobody says I'm proud of you. It's just like, yeah, that's great. I mean, not even that's great, just a grunt. And so the acknowledgement of a tiny little thing that they did well is going to go a long way. I had another student very recently, high schooler, all right, junior, got into a summer program for Wharton, all right, best business program in the world. And parents didn't say anything. They're like, yeah. Oh, she was so mad. She didn't want anything except for her parents to say, I'm so proud of you. This is a hard program to get into. that little tiny piece of acknowledgement will go a long way. And then again, like I said, what do you think you did differently that made a change in your grades? This is a good follow-up question. When a student does well, after you acknowledge, you say, well, what do you think you did that worked this time? And I asked that student, I said, whose grades went up a lot, he said, well, I was able to, be more focused. I slept earlier. I followed my schedule. I made a point to check my schedule every morning. And I said, that's great. Let's keep those parts. What did you not do well? Again, we're discussing and analyzing the process, right? Now, the key thing about middle school is middle school does not have the pressures of grades as much, and it is the perfect time to make those mistakes and really, really focus on those habits, right? And high school, I'm not saying it's too late, but when a high schooler also needs to pay attention to their grades where it actually counts for college, they're less likely to be willing to take the risk on certain things. And it's just not, and it's also because they're older, their habits are already formed. These things you have to, sorry, can you guys hear me okay? I'm getting some comments about sound. Are you guys hearing me okay? Yes? Okay, cool. All right. And so we just want to make sure that in middle school, we really focus on that process so that they can carry those skills over to high school. And then in high school, they can then focus on the grades. All right. Okay. Next one. Be proactive, be proactive. Okay, I tell this to my high schoolers as well. If you guys forget all of my habits and all of the important advice that I give you today, this is the number one thing that I would like you to remember, is to teach your kids how to be proactive. But you know what? This is something you have to train ever since that they are young. And this goes as far as if they want to order from a menu at a restaurant. If they want to go ask for water, you don't do it for them, you ask them to do it. If they want something, they have to do it. All right, taking initiative. A lot of it, a big problem is, for example, parents forgot to turn in their homework, so they sulk, they hide from their parents, their grade drops, and their parents are upset. Very common. All right, what do I do? My grade is bad. For all of my middle schoolers and my high school students, the first thing I say, like, how can you take initiative and how can you be in control here? Can you go and email your teacher and ask them about what you could do about the grade? Can you go and ask for extra credit? Can you go and see if there's any way to redo the work that you just did and turn it in for a better grade? Especially with the pandemic, a lot of students are getting their grades knocked down just because they made a mistake in turning it in. I had students who turned it in 1 second late. I had students who turned it in a blank paper instead of one with all the answers on it. I had students turn it in the wrong version. And then because of that, their grade dropped. And they didn't do anything about it. So the grade stayed the same. And I'm like, well, why don't you go ask the teacher if you could do something about it? And they're like, I don't know. I'm too scared. Well, if you don't take the initiative, how are you going to make a change, right? And so I think this part that I'm trying to say is that we need to be open enough for the kids to ask us how they can make something better and how we can overcome the mistakes that they made so that they can take the initiative to do better next time. All right. One of the biggest things that are issues with a lot of Asian American kids, well, it's not only Asian American kids, I think kids all around, is that fear of failure, right? We always want to present that best side of ourselves. But actually, I think that when I talk to my students, I always tell them, did you guys know that making a mistake is a huge sign of strength? Because with your mistake, you can learn where your weaknesses are and to be better. If you always pretend that you're good at something, how are you ever going to improve? The other day, I had a student who I said, hey, I'm going to help you with your essay. And can you show me one of your essays from the past that you turned in at school? And he said, okay, give me a minute. And I was like, okay, it's been 10 minutes. He hasn't sent me. And then I said, what's taking so long? He's like, well, I'm trying to find one of the good essays to show you. And I said, I don't want to see one of the good essays. I want to see one of your medium to not so good essays. And he was like, yeah, but I want to show you the good ones. I'm like, but why? I want to see the bad ones. I want to lift the worst portion, not lift the best parts. Lifting the best part doesn't make you better. Lifting the bottom line raises you up overall, right? So I think that's what's really, really important here. How can we teach children to move forward without fear? Well, I've noticed that this is true for adults and for kids, but there's usually two types of people. All right. I mean, of course, there's more, but for this purpose. One type is you need everything around you to be right in place before you take the first step. Okay. For example, if I want to start a project or start a writing assignment, I need to have everything in my head. Everything needs to be perfect. I need to have the exact environment. I'm going to put everything off until I have the right amount of time to get everything started. Okay. And then there's the other kind who, may not have all the ideas down, but they just get started anyway. And then as they are working, they repeat and they do things over and over and over until we have the final draft. Well, I will tell you right now, the first type of person, a lot of times what ends up happening is they never get started. And actually, that is what happens to a lot of my students since I teach English and teach a lot of writing. Why do a lot of kids, they have nothing to write? Because they're so afraid of putting their ideas down on paper. I always tell students, if you have nothing on your paper, we have nothing to work on. Even if it's not perfect, if there's mistakes, who cares? Put it down first. You can always change it to improve. And so this actually is true for even adults. I was working with an adult lately. They were trying to learn a new program and they're like, well, I don't have time to learn this program. And so I need to wait until I have enough time to learn the program and then I can use it. And I was like, if you're going to wait until you have enough time to learn this program for you to use it, you will never learn to use this program ever. So what you really should be doing is learning how to use this program as you are doing day-to-day life and your day-to-day tasks, and then it'll slowly but surely integrate into your life. This is a way to, we can't always be waiting. And that's actually what a lot of students learn from that fear of making a mistake, right? If I make a mistake, I have to start over. It's okay, start over then. We can't be held back by this fear. So how can we teach kids to be proactive? Well, the first thing is don't get mad at them for their mistakes. If they make a mistake, it's like, oh, that's cool. Now what are you going to do? Right? Or even celebrate. Okay, good. You got this out of the way. We already know now this is not going to work. What's next? I think that's really, really, really important. All right. Okay. Next one. Habit number 5, learn to utilize resources. So some of these are getting very, very similar. All right. But I still think it's important to kind of differentiate them. What do I mean by utilize resources? I remember when I went to college, I kind of hid in my dorm. I didn't realize all the resources my colleges had that were available to me, whether it was tutoring, whether it was counseling services, whether it was, different student activities. I just didn't know. And even more so in high school and middle school, I never ever thought to ask about the resources that were free and available because I thought I had to do everything myself. Everything was limited to myself, the ability to look around and seek help, whether it's through a person or through the internet or asking somebody else to connect you to somebody else, making that ask, that is so, so important. That's how networking starts, right? A lot of my students, for example, I have a student lately who was very interested in photography and he was like, well, I can't, I don't know if I can do this because it's during the pandemic and I don't know where I could go. I'm like, have you asked your parents if they were willing to take you to a couple places to take photos? And he was just like, no. So again, didn't use a resource. All right. I have a student who will be like, well, I'm really struggling in English right now and I don't really know what to do about this. And I'm like, well, hello, English teacher here. Did you ever come and ask me? No. So all the resources around them, where is this problem? It's stemming from a child's inability to ask for help. And this is true even for adults. My husband, I made this, I don't know if I remember this example a couple weeks ago, but my husband very recently he messaged me one day and he said, I just did the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. And this is an adult, right? He said, I had to ask for help. And I just thought this was the funniest comment because, he's great at his work, but even for adults, it's very, very difficult. And so how can you train kids to ask for help? Well, you make them ask for help now. And it can start with you telling them, hey, do you need help? Giving them ideas of who they can go ask and then allow them to go ask themselves. It also includes looking on the internet and teaching them how to use resources online. For example, If you don't have any ideas, can you find an expert who does have an idea? Let's just say your child is interested in marketing. You yourself are an engineer. You have no idea what it's like to be in marketing. Do you have any friends who are interested in marketing? Could you perhaps go online and find somebody who is in your network who already has interest in marketing or in design? And can you ask your child to maybe even email them to say like, hey, my child needs some help. Would you mind giving them some advice? I mean, even small things like that. Yes, cold emailing, cold asking, even that can help. Another one, my student, that's what I'm talking about marketing. One of my students, she's very interested in marketing and she doesn't realize the resources that she has around her. I was just talking to her literally 2 or 3 days ago and I said, why don't you go and ask the people around you in these small businesses and see if they need help and use those as a way to find an internship. You don't have to sit there and wait to get into a program. What can you do to see that what's already readily available to you? You have to make the ask, right? How can we teach the kids to use the internet well? Well, today there's social media. So social media is a huge resource. If you don't know who to ask, find somebody famous online and DM them. I know it sounds very simple, but I'm serious, it works. You don't need to find a huge celebrity. You can find like small celebrities or people who have a small following. Because they have a small following, they will actually reply to you. And if you get connected to those people, they're going to connect you to more people. Every single middle schooler and high school I've talked to this year, I have found ways to teach them how to use social media and the internet resources with people to connect to others and ask for more information and ask them to connect you to somebody else. This is such a great skill. It's not only can you help me, it's do you know somebody who could help me? That's also a very, very important question. All right. And we have this one. Make sound decisions and problem solve. The biggest issue I hear from kids a lot of times is I already tried it. It didn't work. Well, does that mean that you're going to stop? Or what are you going to do about it? Usually when students in middle school encounter a problem, they just stop in their tracks and they stop moving anymore. Or they'll give you an excuse of why it didn't work. But usually it's almost always an excuse because there's always a solution. And so this is something that we can do to teach our kids to not give up and seek other possible solutions. If they don't have a solution, they can ask the parents instead of just saying, well, I don't know what to do. I actually just had another student this last week who did the same thing. It was a photography student. I said, well, can you, would it be okay if you try to submit your photography into some photography contests? He said, yeah, but all the photography contests, they all have themes and I don't have any themes to my photos, so I can't do it. And I said, well, could you take some pictures that are thematic? Yeah, so one of the themes are pets and, you know, I only have a dog. I don't have any other pets, so I can't do it. And I said, well, could you ask your neighbors? Could you ask your friends? Do they have pets? Oh, but it's a pandemic right now, so no one wants to go out, so I can't do it. I mean, literally every single thing that we're saying, I mean, this is an attitude at this point, right? It's doing the same thing over and over again and then just telling your mind and blocking it off. Can't do it, can't do it. How can we teach our kids that there are always other solutions? I always tell my kids, if this is not the right way, that's just only one path. There's always hundreds of paths to get to the destination. This is true even for college, right? If you can't get into college, a good college now, maybe you can go for graduate school. Maybe you can, transfer, right? There's lots of different ways. It's not only one way. Even for me, like I remember when I was in high school, going into college, because of the area that I live in, I was made to feel like a class reject or that I wasn't smart enough because I went to a school that was not an Ivy League. Well, what did I do afterwards? I decided to work really hard afterwards and get myself into a school that I wanted to get into. So it's not only one way. I see parents these days, they look at their kids and they're like really disappointed because all of their grades are not good enough. And I'm just like, grades aren't everything. Do they have these skills? Do they have the ability to problem solve? Now, if you do not have the grades and you still don't have these habits, then you're in trouble. Then you really are. right? So we need to teach these kids to have these habits to do well. In addition, I have high schoolers currently who have grades like a 3.4 GPA, and the parents are like, it's really unfair because the grades don't show everything everything about them. And then at the same time, the parent is the one who is making all of the decisions for the child. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, even if I get your child into a good college, which we can do with a really great essay, we're going to make him sound wonderful. Is he even able to survive? Because he can't even make his own decisions. He doesn't even know, like, what does he want? Because you're the one who's telling him what he wants. So are we asking our kids what do they think and how are they going to do execute on the decisions that they want? This is very, very important to always ask the kids, what do you think? How did you get to this solution? How can we solve this problem? What are you going to do about it? And have a discussion with them. Kids are very, very willing to give you their opinions as long as you ask. All right. My last habit today is learning how to study effectively. As we all know, studying is really, really important for helping these kids get good grades. But the problem is kids don't know how to study. And the typical example I always use is when a student gets a bad grade, the parents get upset. And then they said, why didn't you study more? And the kid said, but I did study. Well, why didn't you get a good grade then? And then now both people are mad at each other because the kid feels like they studied. The parents feels like they didn't study enough and they're just upset. But let's dig deeper, right? I mean, this is very common, right? So let's dig deeper. I asked the kid, how did you study? Oh, I reviewed my notes. I'm like, oh, that's cool. What else did you do? That's it. How many times did you read your notes? Oh, like 5 times. Oh, really? Did you do anything else? No. How much time did it take for you to study? I don't know, like 30 minutes. Oh, is that it? Yep. So we're seeing, we're trying to find the root cause here, right? And then I asked them a very simple question. Could you explain the concepts to me? Or are you just familiar with the concepts? And when I ask, can you explain the concepts to me? They're like, I'm like, well, then you didn't study enough because you don't know it well enough. So I think the difference is the student or the middle schooler's idea of what it takes to be enough is at a completely different level of what the parents expect is enough. And that gap is where there's miscommunication. And the problem though is a lot of times parents are not communicating what are the standards of what it means to be enough. So for example, I recently had a student, we wrote a paper together. He was getting that borderline B to an A in school. And so I invited him over to my office. I said, you know, we're going to work on this together. We worked on it together and we created an awesome paper. Like really, he did a great job. And then I asked him, well, what do you think? He was like, this is like 3 times longer than my normal paper. I'm like, well, this is an A paper. That's why you weren't getting an A, because you were only writing a third of what was actually considered normal, or for an A at least. All right. Next, same student. He was getting B's in chem honors. All right. I'm like, well, what's wrong? He's like, I studied already. I already studied a lot. And I'm like, okay, well, how much are you studying? 30 minutes. What are you doing? Reading over the notes. Have you memorized any of the information? No. If you don't memorize it, how are you going to answer these questions? Like, well, I read it over already like 5 times. I read the textbook. Did you take notes on what you were reading? No. Did you make any flashcards? Did you review? Did you like explain it over again, like verbally? Did you write out like, you know, did you look for sample questions on the internet or sample equations that you could practice at home? No. All he did was he read the notes, he read the chapter, and that was studying. Well, these little tricks in between, guess what? Kids don't know them automatically. They don't, right? You need to teach it to them. You need to actively say like, okay, you know what? I know you think that this is enough for studying. Let me quiz you. If you don't know the answer and you can't explain it back to me, then maybe that's not enough, right? And if they don't believe you, then the grades will tell, right? If they studied that much and they didn't get the grades, well, let's try it my way this time. Okay. Or another thing that you can do is you can add one thing on each time, because if you pile on like 10 different things to force them to study from here to here, it's not going to work. So let's say this time, instead of just reading it over and, reading the textbook, let's have them make some flashcards, right? Like 10 flashcards and practice that way. That's just one extra thing that's different. And then next time after that, let's teach them how to outline their notes in a way that's more efficient. Next time after that, let's split up studying into a couple of times. Like each time add on one new thing so that they can learn one at a time instead of telling them how to do 10 different new things. All right. We really need to figure out what exactly is the issue with the students studying, not just they don't study enough, right? In addition, does your child know about pre-studying? So one thing that's very interesting that is so important that we start to teach kids in middle school is that in order to do well on a test, it's not just finishing homework. Most kids usually have a wake-up call around 10th grade, 11th grade latest, but mostly 10th grade is when schoolwork becomes so hard that doing homework alone is not enough. Some students learn this lesson in middle school, but for the kids who are really bright, get away with just doing their homework and doing well on tests, it doesn't even happen until 10th grade. And at that point, they're really frustrated because they feel like they are doing everything correctly. They're completing the work, they're doing all of the homework, they're reading over their notes, they're reading over the textbook. Why am I not getting an A? Why is mom and dad getting mad at me? I'm doing everything I am supposed to do. But they're not doing everything they're supposed to do because they actually don't know how to study. They don't know that before a test, they're supposed to be going over material, maybe a little bit every single day. Right? They don't know how to split up each chapter into sections and really getting familiar with this section enough that you know it like the back of your hand, so that when no matter what the question is, you still know the answer. I mean, that's true studying. This is the kind of studying that we expect students to do in college. So we need to start teaching them how to do that in small bits as early as middle school, when the concepts and the material are really, really, really easy. It's not hard yet. Right? And so then we can take that knowledge and be like, look, you know this material so well, there's no way you can get anything that's not an A. That's how we train them. All right. And like I said earlier, what's the difference between just being familiar with material and actually knowing the material? Let's make sure that they actually know it. They can explain it. Like I said, in this pyramid over here, once a child is able to completely explain something, summarize it, structure it, define it, generalize, develop, and illustrate it, all of these things, this is when you know that they know it really, 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 really well. All right. Most kids, they think that they know something well, maybe when they get to this green section, and that's it. But we really want to get them to this last section. All right. So in summary, all right, there are 7 habits that we really need to work on developing for middle schoolers: setting their goals, creating a pathway to reach them. And we've talked about this in the past before, right? In our previous sessions, I went in depth on how we can set goals using SMART goals. Predicting the amount of time to do something and setting priorities. Predicting the amount of time to do something is really important. One problem that I didn't mention earlier is when kids fail to complete work, it's because they didn't realize it was going to take as long as they thought. I mean, this is so common, right? I thought it was going to be 30 minutes. Nope, it took like 2 hours. So with this practice, they can get to know themselves better. They will actually gain confidence, and they will still be able to get their work done in a more timely fashion. You need to teach them how to learn. Focus on the process. What are the things before the result that they need to do first, and then focus on that. And don't forget to acknowledge and praise them for it. Teach them to be proactive, right? Be the one to reach out to someone. In Chinese, 比较主动，要主动去做事情, right? Taking initiative to talk to somebody, to ask for help, right? To look at the resources around you, whether it's people, it's whether it's other adults, whether it's your teacher, whether it's your counselor, whether it's the internet, whether you're going to social media, whether you are cold calling a company or a lawyer from this company because you want to be a lawyer, which is actually something I asked one of my middle schoolers to do because he was interested in law. I'm like, hey, why don't you go on LinkedIn and go and message a couple lawyers and see if they will respond? One did, and they got an interview. I mean, that's initiative, right? High schoolers who are able to find research internships. It's so difficult if you were to apply to a real program. So how do high schoolers get research projects? They literally will cold email a ton of graduate students. And at some point, somebody's going to say, hey, I'm willing to take on someone, someone who worked for me for free. That initiative is so important. Okay. And then making decisions and aiming to problem solve. Well, first off, stop making all decisions for your kids and let them do it. If they make a mistake, let them take the consequences because they made that decision. In middle school, honestly, there's really no decisions, I believe, that's like so terrible where the consequences are going to ruin them, at least in middle school and in elementary school. Let them make small mistakes and suffer those small consequences so they will learn. I mean, it's a very small one, but like when my son is 3, you know, he likes touching everything, right? And so I remember when I had like a hot cup on my table and my mom said, no, don't let him touch it. It's hot. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to let him touch it. I put his finger right on there. It's not that hot. Okay. I put his finger right on the cup and I said, it's hot. And he goes, so now he knows every time I say the word hot, he's not going to touch it. That's how you learn. It's a small concept. He didn't really get burned. He's just a little hot, right? The time to do it is before high school when grades count, right? But part of it is because I let them make that decision. I'm like, you want to touch it? Go ahead. All right. And then teaching your kids to really study effectively. You have to actually sit down with them and show them how to do it, not just expect that they know it themselves. All right. I hope you learned something new today.